Hello, everyone, and thank you for letting me off of the hook for Tuesday, September 10th, I believe that it is. I am sure you're wondering what I'm doing, but I'm going up to Jefferson City to join in some political action regarding Amendment 3. So that's what I will be doing all day tomorrow, which means I won't be in my office at all. I won't be back until Wednesday morning. So what I thought that I would do is from my home office here, just talk to you about what the most recent chapter is that we're reading, which I believe is chapter 4, about mass media and some of the persuasion theories that it talks about. And the fact of the matter is that once again, your book does a pretty good job of explaining the individual theories. I think my biggest critique of this chapter is that they go on and on and on about all these different theories and perspectives and ways of looking at mass media channels in political campaigns, and then they go right back to the same conclusion that they started with. I don't call that coming full circle. I call that limited in view. And the reason that I say that is because I think a lot of times we're tempted to say, oh, this is just like what happened before when it comes to communication theory. Like I was explaining to you last week with how we study political ads, either from the video style perspective or from the functional approach of ads. You can't apply it to everything. What works for one channel is not going to work for another channel. In fact, I'm highly disappointed that they did not talk more or at all about Marshall McLuhan. For those of you who know who that is, fantastic. For those of you who don't, believe me, I understand 100%. I had a lot of friends in my PhD program who were kind of like, who the hell is Marshall McLuhan? And they studied mass media. So I'm going to introduce you to him today because I think that his viewpoint on the mass media is very unique in a lot of ways, but more importantly, gives us a way of looking at mass media channels that's slightly different from what your book gave you. Now, if I pick up any mass media effects modeling book, I'm going to find those theories that your book chapter talks about. Everything from the hypodermic needle effect all the way through ELM and agenda setting. I'm going to find a couple of other theories as well that they don't mention, two of them that I really happen to like. So there's Marshall McLuhan. He has multiple sort of perspectives about mass media, and Gerbner. Gerbner wrote something known as cultivation theory. So you may have heard those in your other classes. If you did, great. Hopefully I get it right. If you didn't, let me introduce you to them. So let's start with Marshall McLuhan. First of all, who was he? Well, he was a theorist who died in the 80s. He actually was not writing when the VCR came out. Now, if you don't know what a VCR is, it was the first place that we were able to watch home movies. Prior to that, you would have to wait for a television channel to sponsor showing a movie. Otherwise, you were in the theater, and that was it. And that was the only place that you could watch movies. When VCRs came around, it started out with home videos. So it started the trend of people carrying around little mini camcorders on their shoulders and recording their children's ballet recitals or whatnot, all the way to America's Funniest Home Videos, which a lot of time came from what's known as a VHS tape or a beta tape, and it was physical tape, like an audio tape only with video, literally a magnetic tape. And actually, point of stupid trivial information here, the National Tape Group, National Recording Group, I can't remember the name of it, it's National something, it's actually not on National, but it's down in downtown Springfield. The building is pretty much gutted at this point, but they were the last company producing magnetic tape. So cassette tapes, VHS tapes, all of those, the last time they were produced was down in our own town here in Springfield, Missouri. You probably didn't know that, and I really don't know why you need to anymore, but there it is. One of the reasons why the building is just gutted at this point is because originally the government had asked them to store and stock up a bunch of VHS tape recordings that they had accumulated at the National Archives. And then they decided, nope, we don't need to do that. We're just going to make them all digital and move on. So the building we might have bought it, actually. Missouri State University might have bought it. I don't recall. But it's down near Brick City. So the next time you see National Recording or National Tape Company or whatever it's called, just look at the building and know that a lot of history was made there. Anyway, that being said, these tapes that I'm talking about are important to understanding Marshall McLuhan, because McLuhan talked about media in a very different way from everyone else. He said, and again, this was before a VCR was in the mix, okay? Before you could take movies home, before you could order crap on television, before there was cable, before all of that. He was a Canadian by birth. He lived here in the United States, particularly in St. Louis, actually, believe it or not, so from this region. But he was known for developing something called hot and cold media. So Marshall McLuhan said that the medium is the message. In other words, whatever form of media you're using, whatever medium you choose, that is what makes the message have meaning. Now, he didn't mean that it was solely the only thing that mattered, but the media is definitely part of the message. So if it was done by newspapers, or if it was done by television, or if it was in a movie theater, all of those different media required you to use a different amount of energy in order to watch it. You had to invest in reading a newspaper a heck of a lot more than you had to invest in watching television, right? Because television has sight and sound and movement, whereas a newspaper is print and you have to go in and actually read it. Now, some people debate about what his interpretation was, but if I understand it correctly, and I think I do, the medium gives you more or less information. So, for example, the television gives you a lot of information: movement, color, 3 dimensions, in a lot of ways, or at least allows you to perceive 3 dimensions, even though you're not looking at a 3-dimensional item or object. But it gives you movement, it gives you sound, it gives you everything that your brain needs to just absorb all of the messages that are coming through that medium. That indicates that the medium itself is extremely hot. It's giving you a lot of information all at once, and different types of information for you to be able to view it. And commercials come right at you with, you don't have any control or choice over them. On TV, please remember that we could not fast forward through commercials or skip them like I can on YouTube or whatnot. So it was considered an incredibly hot medium, whereas the newspaper was incredibly cold. You had to do all of the work to get that information from that medium that you wanted to get. Okay, so if you think about a newspaper being very cold, a telephone is pretty cold because you only get one dimension, which is to say you can listen and you can talk, but that's all you get, right? You can't see facial expressions. You can't, you can now, but keep in mind these were corded telephones back then. And then, he actually, when he talked about hot and cold media, what he did was not so much important of like, okay, well, is the internet hot or cold? That's a debate I have with my colleagues all the time just for the hell of it, because it's fun. It's fun to talk about whether you need to go seek out the information that you want, or if it just comes flying at you and you have no choice, how hot or cold the internet is. Personally, I argue it's the frozen tundra of media, but other of my friends will argue that it's hotter than hell. It just depends on how you look at it, because for me, a lot of internet media, you have to either pick up your phone, turn on your television, pick up your computer, you have to type in an address, or you have to click on something, and you have to continue to do that. Also, you need to put a lot of input into what you're going to get back. Now, some internet media has changed that. For example, TikTok. However, TikTok reads me more than I read it, right? And so does Facebook, and so does Twitter. The algorithms, the artificial intelligence really picks up what I'm looking at. Siri is constantly listening to me. I'm sure that tonight I'm going to get an offer on one of my YouTube videos for a new computer or a new phone service, because that's what Siri does. She hears me. Marshall McLuhan's hot and cold media was not important because it told us what was hot and what was cold, but because it gave us a language to talk about mass media. So it's not so important whether something is hot or cold as much as it's important that to you, what does that media tell you about the message? One of the second theories that he had was the idea of the global village. I know that people credit this a lot to Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and some others who talked about taking a village to raise children and so on. But the fact of the matter is that McLuhan came up with it first. The idea that the world was going to get smaller and smaller and smaller as media developed. And he even said at one point, I expect that one day you'll be able to pull up your watch and say, I want to see an elephant in Africa, and boom, you'll see an elephant in Africa right then and there. Was it a portent? I don't know if it was a prediction or not, but I think that more importantly, it was that he understood what was coming. That every type of media that came along shrunk our world a little bit, gave us more information about what was going on over there or out there or across the country or whatever way you want to define it. And so our world became smaller, more of a global village than anything else. And it would have been really interesting for him to see, for us to see what he would have thought of the fact that, yeah, you can actually go onto your watch and say, I want to see an elephant in Africa, and boom, you've got a live elephant in Africa. It is pretty interesting to read his work. In fact, his work called The Mechanical Bride is the last thing that I'm going to talk about. The Mechanical Bride describes how media is nothing more than the extension of humans. And if you think about it, we're all connected through media, right? We used to be connected through the human condition, the fact that we were all human. Now we're connected in even stronger ways. We can pick up the telephone and see our mom or see our friends or whoever it is that we want to see, our child. We can watch videos of things. We can see them in real time. For military families, this has been particularly important because they get to see people that they haven't seen in 6 to 12 months sometimes. So those kinds of things really brought our world together through this idea that media is the extension of humans. Okay, so three main big things to get from Marshall McLuhan. One, the idea of hot and cold media as a language to talk about the effect, how the media impacts the message, how medium, impacts the message. Number two, the idea of the global village. Okay, that is, we are all more connected than we've ever been, making our world a lot smaller. And number three is that idea of media being just an extension of humans. We are attached to our phones. We have them in our ears. We can actually bank on our phone, right? We could go and purchase things by taking a picture of an app on a table at a restaurant. We can order that way. We can pay our bill that way. It's just gotten to a point where we have so much technology that extends us into an interconnected world, thereby making the world so much smaller. And thereby making it more possible for us to experience more hot media, so that we can get more information. And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to teach mass media, and I don't attempt to do it, because I leave that to the media department. I leave that, or the media portion of our department, I leave that to people like Deb Larson and others to really talk about that a lot more. Why am I bringing up Marshall McLuhan in a political communication class? The obvious answer is that your book does a great job of explaining all these theories about how we think information or communication literally gets transferred, interpreted, and sent out or whatnot through different media, right? But what they don't tell you is how to talk about that. So I wanted to give you that little bit of language. And that actually leads to the second theory that I told you I wanted to talk about, or perspective, from George Gerbner. George Gerbner, his initial theory, a lot of people called it mean world syndrome. And what that meant was the more television you watched, and this was specific to television, and then it went into violent video games, and then it went into pornography. And you'll see what I mean here. He said the more television that you watch that is violent, the worse you think the world is out there. So the more crime shows that you watch, for example, police procedurals, as we used to call them, like Law and Order, which started in the 80s, and Hill Street Blues, which was in the 70s, and oh gosh, there are a ton of them. I could go all the way back to, Barney Fife. I could go way back, but TV shows like Law and Order, NCIS, and so on that have been on for 10, 15, Criminal Minds, 20 years. What happens when you watch all those is that you begin to think that everybody in the world is terrible, that there's crime right next door to you, that this could happen to you. And I think that it's interesting because I was raised on that television. My dad was a district attorney, so crime was in my blood. We were constantly under threat of some kind, which is why I'm probably a little more cavalier about it than most people are, which isn't necessarily healthy, but it's also unhealthy to walk around thinking there's serial killers next door or that everyone in the world is mean. But that's what watching that kind of media starts to make you think. So it was originally called mean world syndrome. But what we've learned is that the type of media you decide to digest, and I'm sure you've heard this before, your media diet, if you will actually dictate sort of your psyche and your feelings about the world. So instead of just saying, well, it's all mean, or it's all cruel, or it's all bad, what about the positive things? What happens if you watch uplifting things? What if you watch love stories all the time? Like, what does that do? Well, that makes you feel like maybe the world's a little bit kinder than someone who watches criminal TV shows. So the theory sort of developed a little bit more into what we call cultivation theory, that literally media that you ingest is cultivating, growing, producing the perspective that you have on the world. And that influences how you act, but more importantly, how you communicate. Okay, so how do we use these? And by the way, that is the briefest overview of cultivation theory I've ever given. It's obviously a lot more intricate than that, but that gives you an idea of it. How does that all play into political communication? Well, one of the ways that it plays into political communication is that everybody thinks that politics are negative, right? Everybody thinks that politics are nothing but criticizing the other side. And the reason we think that is because the media drives that. What else does the media drive or cultivate in political communication? One is horse race politics. This idea that we can know about the election that is, what am I at, 57 days away. You can't. I tell people this all the time about polling. It is a snapshot. That's all it is. And that's without context. It's without any predictive value, really. Unless there's huge differences, you're probably not getting a big enough sample to truly know what's going to happen on election night. This is the problem also with exit polling. You know, when people would come out of the polls, they'd say who you vote for. You could lie, you could tell the truth, you could do whatever you want. Exit polls are notoriously wrong. Just wrong. I mean, you would think of all the polling we do, it would be the most correct, but it's actually completely wrong. Why is that? Well, they're only asking a certain number of people. You know how research works. You get a sample. You pray that sample is somewhat good. But if you poll everybody in the state of Missouri and no other state, you're not going to get a good read on it. If you poll 3 people from a city in 5 different states, you're not going to get a good read on it. In fact, you would have to do so many questionnaires for polling that it would take you as long as the election cycle to truly be able to predict what's going on or what's going to happen. And even then you won't be 100% correct, or you definitely have no guarantee. So why is it then that we take those snapshots? It's because we want people to think that the races are closer than they are, because the closer you think they are, the more likely you are to watch television or read newspapers or buy media. So all of this is a capitalistic view of media, but it's probably a true one. Another thing that political media does, or media with political content does, is makes you feel good or bad. This is where cultivation theory really comes in. It makes you feel good or bad about politics. And it depends on what you're getting. And so this is also how we end up in little bubbles, believing that everybody loves the things that we love. Everybody sees the world the way that we see the world, and that's just inaccurate. So whenever people tell me that they're looking at media effect studies, like the ones that are listed here, I have a tendency to get a little jumpy. There's a great theorist who studies health campaigns. His name is Michael Stevenson, one of the best researchers I've ever met. And I took a couple of classes from him, and he was just like, Liz, why can't you understand that if I've got these numbers on this multiple regression, that tells me how predictive my model is? I'm just like, because you're not telling me anything. You're not giving me meaning. Whereas for him, he would be like, I don't understand rhetoric. What the hell does that word mean? It's just a bunch of, it's just a bunch of personal interpretation theories. And that's the way we look at the world? I don't think so. And we always had these really good debates about what was coming at us. And I think what's important for you to understand is that both of these ways of looking at the media and studying the media are important. And until we're all able to read everything that there is, we're not going to truly be able to predict a presidential election that well. That said, Dr. Stevenson would tell you that the only way to know is through actual polling what's going to happen in an election. I would tell you that you can listen to some of the historical perspectives. So there is this one man, and cannot remember his name. I know you guys probably, some of you might know his name if you're a political nerd like I am, who has predicted accurately the outcome of like all of the elections in the past like 40 years, something like that, some crazy thing. And he does tend to predict the winners of the popular vote, which is not always what the Electoral College comes up with, right? Because that's almost impossible to predict, unless you're in the minds of all the electors, which some people, you know, they're definitely, some electors will not vote the way that their constituencies voted, and that's problematic for the electoral. That's problematic, right? But we've talked about the Electoral College, or we will talk more about it as time goes on, and how that changes and shifts our communication about politics. So that idea of cultivating the idea of politics is not media driven, it's economically driven. It's capitalistic. It's the media wanting to make money, sell more newspapers, right? Yellow journalism, create a horse race, accuse Harding of being part black, as they refer to it, trying to muddy up a name in order to make a certain political candidate look bad on purpose, even though it has no basis in reality. That is not new. Now, your book mentions specifically Harding in the 1920 election, and I'm so glad that it did. And one of the reasons why I am is because I happen to know some of Warren G. Harding's descendants, some of the youngest ones. And now it's coming out that Warren G. Harding was pretty much having a lot of relations with a lot of people and producing a lot of children. But it's kind of neat to know that, and to also read that what they tried to do was attach him to the idea of being black, because at the time, being black was not good. That was considered a negative. It was a terrible stereotype. They were still, coming out of the slave era, very closely to the slave era in America, Southern America especially. So associating him with being black was going to cause him trouble, and it did, right? I mean, ultimately he became president, but it caused him some trouble. Nowadays, we have finally moved to a point where we have accepted a president who also happens to be black or half black or whatever the hell the term is that I'm supposed to use for Barack Obama, right? We become more accepting of people when the media tells us to. So if the media had never moved past the idea that, black, white, brown, yellow, green, purple, whatever color you are is just as important as the other. And once we got past that, once we cultivated that attitude, then we were able to do things like elect people who were different colors and different ethnicities and different religions and so on. In 1960, they were still up in arms about the fact that John Kennedy was a Catholic. Clearly he's going to listen to the Pope and nobody else, because that's what all Catholics do, right? That was the attitude back then. If you don't know that, just so you know, the history of the Catholic Church is that you follow what the Pope says in Rome, and you don't go outside of that. So people who were electing a president, the first Catholic president said, hey, how can we know that John F. Kennedy is going to do what we need him to do and not just follow the Catholic Church, not just follow the Pope? And that was an obstacle he had to overcome. But again, we cultivated the idea that he would not make the same decisions as the Pope would make. And so whenever we want to change the perspective on politics, the media is how we do that. Now, there are certain things that the media can't do. For example, the media cannot make it possible for, let's say, for example, I'm going to use the campaign I know the most about, Missy Hesketh to raise the same amount of money as Eric Burleson. For a lot of reasons. He's an incumbent. We already know that gives him an advantage. We already know that he can send out, flyers with his picture on it, his name on it, things he's accomplished as updates on the taxpayer's dollar, because he is our current U.S. representative. And so a challenger like Missy can't do that. So they're at a unique disadvantage. The media cannot make up for that. Right? You have to wait for the media to capture a mistake or a gaffe on their part in order for it to work for the other candidate in this case. So we can view media as coming at us and giving us things and forcing those things on us, or as something we have to go dig into and look for. It's both, honestly. And we can look at media as a way to cultivate certain attitudes towards people, politics, environmental disasters, issues, and legislation. And the final theory that they talk about really with media effects, and it's less of a media effect, I think, than it is part of the cultivation theory, which is that the idea of agenda setting. You will talk about the issues that the media talks about. It happens to all of us. If you are exposed to any media, newspapers, television, radio, does not matter, you will follow what the people are talking about. This is also, again, how we create that safety bubble that we live in, okay? Because we start to hear, love Donald Trump because of this, or love Kamala Harris because of that, and we jump into that and we say, okay, I should like Kamala Harris, I should like Donald Trump, and then we start seeking out media that tells us what we want to hear and what we already agree with. So the agenda is always set by the media that we receive, however we receive it. So I don't know if you need me to talk about each of those theories that's in your book. I keep pushing that way because that's where my book is. But if you have questions about a particular media theory, I'm more than happy to go through and answer it. As you've probably figured out by now, I am definitely more of a humanist interpretivist rhetorician than I am anything else. And so that is why I focus on things like hot and cold media, or more importantly on things like cultivation theory, agenda setting, and framing. Those are all media theories, but they require an understanding of the interpretation of how the medium is impacting the message and how that message then impacts the perception of the people. So I don't believe in polls. I'm not a fan, but I listen to a podcast called Polar Coaster, which you have to actually subscribe to listen to. But I do that specifically because I am looking for someone to please explain to me how this is helpful to us as voters. Not a lot of people go and seek out random information that they don't know yet because, they're bored. But myself as a total political nerd, I have to know. I have to try to understand why it is that polls are so popular. Part of it is horse race. Part of it is we want something to talk about and how to talk about it. We can't just go, oh, hey, the temperature of the country seems to be positive for Donald Trump or positive for Kamala Harris. You need some data to back that up. And so I never watch polls. I never look at polls. Missy said to me the other day, she said, hey, did you see the poll from the Hill? And I said, you don't read polls. The poll, eyes on the prize, not on the lies, is the way I always put it to her, because to me, polls are so unreliable, is how I'm going to use it. But you may think completely differently, and that's totally cool, because I do have some friends out there who are total number crunchers who will try to convince me that polls are so incredibly important. And so I'll leave that to your best judgment on how you view political communication theory and how we look at the world. Your assignment for this week that yes, I have yet to put up, but I will do that just now. Your assignment for this week is to, I believe, I don't remember exactly how I worded it on the agenda or on the, let me see. On the syllabus is what I'm trying to say. Those are the words that I'm trying to get out of my mouth. So I'm going to look at it for you in real time, obviously. Okay. So what I have is examples of media in federal campaigns. Yeah, that's not real clear, is it? So I think what I'm going to ask you to do is to pick one of those theories that's in the book. And I want you to tell me why you think it's useful or why it's not useful, or both. But take a position on it in the end. Is it useful? Is it not useful? So read up on one of those theories and write about whether you think it's useful or not and why. Okay, everybody. I will return back to you in the classroom on Thursday. I'm looking forward to it. In the meantime, you guys have a great beginning of your week. I'll talk to you soon.